Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Satsunami. I'm Satsunami and joining me today is a very special agent. He has a golden eye for these kind of films. He promises that tomorrow never lies. He always promises as well that the world is indeed not enough and he will try another day. Joining me today is Adam. Adam, welcome back.
Hello. Good to be back, and thank you for stealing every single pun that I could possibly make in the intro. So, yeah, I'm not even going to try. You stole them all.
Oh, come on, don't pout. Come on.
No, I'm going to pout. This is going to be a whole episode now. You'll sit in the corner and you'll be like, so what do you think? I'm like, I don't care.
You're not my real pun fan. So yeah, how you doing today, Adam? Other than that,
other than that, I'm doing fine. Thank you very much. How about yourself?
not too shabby. Actually, really happy that we are going to be talking about James Bond again today.
It feels good. It's like slipping into a comfortable pair of slippers once again. Feeling familiar territory.
A comfortable pair of slippers that have a switchblade in the tip. Yeah.
I mean, of course. I mean, that's the only pair of slippers you'd want, surely.
Because we have done 2 episodes so far. Well, technically 3 episodes of James Bond. We've done a retrospective for the Timothy Dalton era. We've done a retrospective for the Daniel Craig era. And we've also done a review for No Time to Die. Yeah, now we're moving on to the next James Bond on our list. That, of course, being probably the more agreeable one out of the ones we've got left. Pierce Brosnan. So, Adam, before we go into the main episode, what are your memories and experiences with this particular run of James Bond?
I think, like a lot of people my age, Pierce Brosnan was the Bond actor that I grew up with. The very first Bond film that I saw was Die Another Day, which was Brosnan's last film. So I'd never seen a Bond film before, but I went to somebody's birthday party and we went to the cinema to go see Die Another Day. And it's the film that actually got me hooked into the Bond films. And after that, I went back and I got copies of all the older films, watched them all, loved them. So really, the Brosnan run really sparked a love of the kind of franchise for me that, as much as my opinions have changed on a lot of them now, I still do retain a fondness for the Bond films. So it's important to me in that respect for kicking off my interest in it.
I have to admit, Pierce Brosnan was definitely the Bond of the late 90s and the early 2000s, wasn't he? He was like the kind of iconic image whenever you thought of James Bond. Obviously, you've got your Connery fans, your Moores, your Lazenby sympathisers, the Timothy Dalton group, which I know you and I are part of.
The Dalton Defenders, as I call us.
Oh, yeah. You tried mailing the t-shirt to me. I'm not wearing it, Adam.
But come on, please. Getting badges made and everything.
Well, if you turn them into pogs, then maybe I'll reconsider.
Of course. Why didn't I think of that?
And speaking of dated references, yeah, I actually remember the Pierce Brosnan films coming on TV quite a lot during probably the mid-2000s, where, you had your Goldeneye coming on, your Tomorrow Never Dies, your, as I said, World's Not Enough, and the less said about it, the better, Die Another Day, which came out in 2002, I want to say, and that was kind of the unfortunate swan song to Pierce Brosnan's run as James Bond before he moved on to the darker times of playing a central role in Mamma Mia. Unfortunately, Mamma Mia is not going to be featured in this episode, so if that's what you tuned in to hear tonight, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry you had to find out this way.
I feel Mamma Mia is more of an official James Bond film than whatever the last one, that unofficial one that Connery did, the remake of Thunderball.
What, Never Say Never?
That's the one, and name was escaping me there from I feel Mamma Mia is A better film, and B, more keeping of the canon of Bond.
You're not wrong. One day we will review that, but yeah, until then we're going to have to reel ourselves back into the past, which makes me feel like an old man thinking, my God, we grew up in this time. Because it's like with the Dalton series, and I mean, obviously we grew up with the Daniel Craig ones as well, but with the Dalton series, the Roger Moore, the Sean Connery, the Lazenby, yeah, we weren't really around for obvious reasons. different, but this was kind of the start of, is it right to say, like, our formative experience with the franchise?
Well, I think so. I mean, certainly for myself anyway, because I was 9 or 10. I can't quite remember exactly when Die Another Day was released, what month it was, but I was 9 or 10, at that time. So right in those formative years where you're building, your interests in different things.
And of course, there were the games, which, say in all honesty, I know there's technically games before Goldeneye, but I don't actually remember there being any particular games that were as popular.
Yeah, like you're right. There technically were games before, but honestly, we might as well say there weren't really before GoldenEye for all the impact that they made. I mean, unless there is there's some out there that I'm just not giving them their fair due, but I don't think any of them had the impact that GoldenEye did.
Because that was certainly a trailblazer at the time. It paved the way for all these different FPS shooters. Like, I mean, look at Time Splitters 2. That had pretty much the same gameplay style, didn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Time Splitters was like a clone of that. Perfect Dark. Lots of those shooters of the late 90s to early kind of 2000s were clones of GoldenEye, so it was really, really important in that respect.
And that kind of just solidified it, didn't it? And really just a general discussion of the franchise, because you also had, I think The World Is Not Enough had a game. Tomorrow Never Dies definitely had one for the PlayStation.
Yeah, they both did. They both had. Tomorrow Never Dies was a weird sort of like third-person shooter game that I don't think was very well received, and The World Is Not Enough went back to the first-person formula, but I think it wasn't on the rails, or maybe it was because I think it was released on like Nintendo 64 and PlayStation, and I think maybe the PlayStation version was like on the rails, almost like a kind of like House of the Dead type thing, which was slightly better received. And then obviously Die Another Day never had a game until 10 years later when it was included in the quote-unquote tribute to the franchise that was 007 Legends.
Your favourite game?
Oh, my favourite game. I'm sure maybe at some point down the line we will discuss 007 Legends, but I don't want to poison this episode with my vitriol for that game.
Between that and watching Terminator Salvation, that's just a perfect evening for you.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, my favourite game and my favourite film is publicly stated by my dear friend, the person who only has my best interests at heart, Satsunami.
He said with clenched teeth. Anyway, before I get shanked by my co-host here.
Good thing we're not in the same room.
Exactly. did I tell you that before we begin? I actually put a tweet out the other day where someone was asking, what's a fun fact about your podcast? And I was like, I have never filmed like a podcast, or rather, I've never recorded a podcast in the same room as any of my co-hosts.
That's kind of crazy to think, isn't it? It'll make it extra special when that eventually happens.
I mean, it's like nearly 100 episodes later. Like, we're not too far off. I think we're about 6 or 7 episodes off that. After this one's released anyway. Maybe even less, but yeah, it's crazy to think that we still haven't done one, like, together. Although we did meet up to watch Starship Troopers, but the less said about that encounter, the better.
That soured the life, the in-person experience.
I think that's why we haven't seen each other since. I had to walk away. It's because I care about you, Adam. I had to walk away.
The only way to ensure that you get the right pizza.
That's true. You and I both. And yeah, before we jump in, Adam, have you got your surferboard and your parachute and your sunglasses and your Madonna references ready?
Yeah, they're all stored in my invisible car on board my big drill submarine ship.
Would you believe, minus that last one, those were references to the same one film?
I know. I spoiled it by taking another film. I should have kept going with my VR headset, which is not an uncomfortable block on your face, but rather a nifty pair of sunglasses.
Hold on. We are going to take just a quick break. I'm going to get the diamonds out of my face, and yeah.
I'll get out my belly button.
Oh, no! Oh, why did you make... Oh, you actually reminded me of a very key point. Thank you for that. So I'm just going to write that down. We will be right back after these messages. Welcome to Satsunami, a variety podcast that talks about topics from gaming and films to streaming and general interests.
Previously on Satsunami, we discussed Game of the Decade, Deadly Premonition, the romantic thriller, Birdemic, and listen to us get all sappy as we discuss our top 5 Christmas films.
If that sounds like your cup of tea, then you can find us on Anchor, Spotify, YouTube, and all good podcast apps. As always, stay safe,
Stay awesome, and most importantly,
stay hydrated.
We are Beer and Chill Podcast.
Podcast where we review TV shows, games, movies, and whatever else takes our fancy.
So what are you waiting for? If you're a cool kid like us, you're gonna listen to the Beer and Chill Podcast. You can get it anywhere from Spotify all the way to your grandmother's radio. My name is Jan.
And I'm Craigie C.
And we are
Beer and Chill.
So, will we start at the very beginning and dive into what solidified Pierce Brosnan as the quintessential James Bond?
let's do it. Let's start at the height.
In 1995, coming off his fame from Remington Steele, Pierce Brosnan slipped into the role of James Bond. And is it right to say, Adam, that he was actually considered earlier?
Yes, so he was originally considered to be the replacement for Roger Moore in the late 80s after A View to a Kill and Roger Moore decided to step away. Pierce Brosnan was lined up to take the role, but unfortunately for him, just as he was about to be announced as James Bond, that TV series that you mentioned, Remington Steele, which he'd sort of made his fame on, was renewed for another season, so he was contractually obliged to do that. So basically they had to scrap those plans, and Timothy Dalton was given the role of Bond. But after a kind of disappointing box office performance of License to Kill, and a kind of very mixed critical and audience reception to that film, 6-7 years of limbo, Timothy Dalton left the role, and then Pierce Brosnan was able to step back into it again.
I was going to ask, I suppose you're quite happy at that.
I mean, I'm not happy that Timothy Dalton only got 2 films, but you know, Timothy Dalton came in at a bad time, I think. I don't know if Pierce Brosnan would have done any better, to be honest. I feel like the films were in a kind of bad place at that point, even though I think Living Daylights and License to Kill are excellent films and only get better, I think, with age. But, you know, things happen. And, you know, Brosnan, I think, happened to come in at a good time, a right time for him, certainly anyway, for his sort of legacy.
It is weird to think, though, that he could have been the star for the Living Daylights and things, and how different that film would have came across. Like, can you imagine him in License to Kill being, like, dark and gritty? And don't get me wrong, he can act really serious when he wants to, but I don't know if he would have that same kind of seriousness as Timothy Dalton. But I mean, they're both like quite different actors, aren't they?
Oh, they definitely are. I mean, Dalton is a stage actor. I think kind of first and foremost, that's where he's cut his bones. I don't think Brosnan, you know, I think Brosnan's always been a sort of, I'm saying that, I think he's always been like a television film actor. He may well have done stagecraft as well. But I don't know. They are very different. You're completely right in saying that. And I don't know. For me personally, I just don't think Brosnan could have done what Dalton did. Whether the films would have adapted to reflect that, and they might have been very different films, perhaps good in their own way, they certainly would not have been what they were with Dalton at the helm. Just because, again, as you say, they are quite different actors. But personally, I prefer Dalton to Brosnan. But that's not to like put down Brosnan in any way. I told him he's a fine actor. That's just kind of personal preference. But yeah, I don't know. Do you think there would have been like a kind of noticeable difference?
I think mainly because if you look at his portrayal in Goldeneye, and I don't know if it's just because it was like a reaction to how serious the last 2 films were. Because if you think about it, the last 2 films were towards the end of the Cold War era. So, you know, the Soviet Union was collapsing. It was during the late 80s and everything. There was still that era of spies at their height, if that makes sense. Whereas when it transitioned into the late 90s, you know, the Soviet Union had collapsed and Goldeneye followed on from like the aftermath from the transition for the Soviet Union into just Russia as it is today, but I don't know if he would have brought a more serious tone to it, because obviously that's what they wanted. And again, if you think about it, the James Bond films are very reactionary. Like, would you agree with that? They're very reactionary to the kind of times.
They definitely are reactionary as well, but they also seem to have this, certainly with maybe some of the more recent ones, and particularly of the kind of Brosnan era, they almost seem to have this desire not to offend though as well, if that makes sense. So as much as, for instance, let's take like The Living Daylights, or Goldeneye or something, as much as like the Soviet Union or like Russia are the bad guys, in that film, there's also, they go to great pains to show like, oh, it's not actually like this country or this government, it's like rogue elements within, and that kind of seems to be in a recurrent theme for, I say, a lot of the Bond films. Like, I'm struggling to think of one that has like out and out, it's like, or the Soviet Union, for instance, is the bad guy. There always seems to be some kind of caveat to it. But you're right in saying that they are reactionary as well. It is sort of a lot of the enemy of the time, enemy of the moment, whoever that is, in kind of Western perception, does often seem to at least be linked to, the bad guys of a particular Bond film.
But it is just weird wondering whether or not Brosnan would have brought a more serious, like, obviously his character is really up to the writers and the directors and things like that. I think he would have a kind of, like, he would be able to put his spin on him, but I don't know how much that would carry through, of him being cheeky and everything when, for example, in 11 Daylights, when they're blowing up the base in Afghanistan and something, like, he could be riding away saying something like, oh, things are getting spicy, and you're like, well, no, that's just not going to fit, because even, I have to admit, even towards the end of Timothy Dalton's run, there were a couple of, like, awkward moments where he would, like, say a pun, and you would be like, oh, it just doesn't fit. Like, the forklift scene from License to Kill, where he says, he got the point, or something, and it sounds as if it's, like, dubbed over.
Yeah, I would argue, I don't know where you feel this, I think the best of the Dalton one-liners were like the really like maniacal, sadistic ones. When in License to Kill, where they've got like the corrupt agent and he's like hanging over the shark pit, and then like he's got the money and he's like, oh, I'll half the money with you, and Dalton's Bond is like, it's your money, you earned it, and just like throws the briefcase at him. Like, that for me was the best of when Dalton was doing those one-liners. If there was humor, it was like the blackest of black humor. It was more like just sadistic threats rather than quippy like, oh, pip pip, whatever, like, you're a cunning linguist. Not that kind of like one-liner that was very much a staple of certainly the Moore era and also kind of the Brosnan era of Bond as well.
Because, I mean, the Brosnan era is pretty much propped up by puns, and we'll get into it later, but especially dad jokes and things like that. Because I remember, and this is kind of going slightly off topic once again, but I remember going to see Quantum of Solace with my dad in the cinema, and I remember him coming out, and obviously, no surprise, he wasn't a big fan of it, but one of the things that he did mention wasn't because, it obviously wasn't written that well, but more because it didn't have the same kind of humour and gadgets and things. And that's what he said, oh, the old James Bonds had the gadgets, the one-liners, the quips, as I said, the kind of cheekiness behind it all, but with the Craig era, which is something we discussed in a retrospective, it's a lot more gritty and serious and things. And I think the Brosnan era definitely kept up that status quo. To borrow a phrase from Roger Moore, he did keep the British end up when it came to this kind of relatively jovialness to spy work, but especially for his debut in Goldeneye. So for those of you who don't know, Goldeneye is really, it's set in the fallout of the Soviet Union. So it's 4 years after the fall of the Soviet Union, and Bond ends up going on a mission. Prior to that, he goes on a mission with one of his colleagues, played by Sean Bean. You know where this is going. Sean Bean unfortunately gets killed in action at the beginning of the mission, so he ends up escaping, getting put on temporary leave, and then he realises there's a conspiracy from a splinter group within the Russian Federation who want to cause trouble and hijack a satellite called Goldeneye. There's also a woman that chokes men with her thighs. I feel as if that's the summariest of summaries I can get out of that. Is there anything I missed?
No, the only thing you missed was, I'm invincible! But apart from that, you got everything else.
I love Boris. I think he's just so...
He's so good.
It's so fun. I think that's the great thing about GoldenEye. Everybody is a lot of fun to watch. I'll come to it in a second, but the majority of characters have like such a personality to them. You've got the Russian general who... Remember the scene where you've got the big set piece where Brosnan's driving the tank down St.
Oh, yeah.
Petersburg? Oh, it's so
really
good,
good,
that
that
scene. And he's got like the hip flask and he's drinking as they're driving away and things. It's just amazing. Like the action in it is great. The one-liners are great. It's actually the perfect premiere film for like a new James Bond and everything.
It really doesn't put a foot wrong, I think, for the most part. It's a really well-crafted film.
And the soundtrack as well. I mean, the soundtrack's just iconic.
Do you know, it's funny, a lot of people don't like the soundtrack.
You know, it's very gritty and quite... This is going to make me sound like a hipster that knows what I'm talking about when it comes to music. I really don't. I'm tone deaf. But it sounds quite industrial, if that makes sense.
It's like a deliberate choice as well, because you're completely right. There's like a lot of like metal clanging sounds at points. And
Yeah.
I really like it. I think it's very effective, and I think it was good at signaling this was like a kind of revamp of the Bond franchise for a new era, especially as you say, now that we're in a post-Cold War world. What's Bond's place? And I thought the soundtrack did well for that, but it's interesting that a lot of people don't like it just because maybe it sounds off to them. It doesn't sound like the kind of classic Bond soundtracks they were used to.
I wouldn't say it's my favourite. You know, you wouldn't go and listen to it over and over again and be like, oh, this is a bop. But in terms of like setting the tone and things, especially as we established this post-Cold War era in which you and I were both born into, what's the meme that goes around? It's like, too late to see the end of the Cold War, but born too early to be a TikTok star.
Oh no, what awkward.
The Venn diagram's screwed up for that one. Let me tell you. But yeah, I think it does give it a distinctive identity, and I think that's what this film needed. It needed its own identity from, as much as I love the Dalton films, it needed its identity from the Dalton films, from the Moore films, from Connery and Lazenby, and David Niven. I'm going to throw him a bone. But yeah, it does definitely do a good job, and of course that carried over when they made the game as well, because I think it was a guy called Grant Kirkhope who did the soundtrack for Goldeneye, the game I mean, and either way, absolutely fantastic. A fun fact though, did you know the guys who made the Goldeneye game were the same company that made Banjo-Kazooie?
Oh, of course, because it was Rareware, wasn't it?
And we never heard from them
They
again.
would go on, a lot of them would go on to make Time Splitters.
Really?
Yeah, that's probably why it's so inspired, but not all of them, but a lot of them went on to left Rare to form that Free Radical that, went on to make the Time Splitters series before that. It was also shut down. I don't know where they ended up after that, but
I actually didn't know that.
another piece of the puzzle.
So, before we move on to the next film, is there anything you didn't like about this film?
Honestly, not really. There's nothing I can really think of that I don't like. I mean, for me, the Brosnan era was this attempt to kind of walk a line between the Moore and Dalton eras of Bond, and attempt almost to blend both of those elements together, because Dalton and Moore's Bonds were very, very different. They might be the ones that, if we were to draw like a diagram of the Bond things, they might be on the complete opposite ends of the spectrum. So I almost felt like Brosnan's Bond was an attempt to marry those two elements, and I don't think any Brosnan film did it better than Goldeneye. I really love the plot and the story to Goldeneye. I think it has a good amount of fun to it, but it also has some really good like serious elements to it. They kind of really good dramatic elements that grip you and drag you in. I love virtually all the characters in this film. Obviously, I'm not the biggest fan of the main Bond girl, Natalia Simonova. She's fine. Like, there's nothing wrong with her. I just don't think she's anything that special. But again, that's like the biggest criticism I'm leveling against it. It's like somebody was fine. There's great like fun elements like Boris and Xenia Onatop and things that you feel like belong in the Moore era. But at the same time, we have a really kind of interesting like revenge plot in there that almost feels more akin to the kind of Dalton era of Bond. So honestly, I think it's a great film, and I think it's also a kind of fascinating cultural document, because as you say, this is like steeped in this kind of post-Cold War new world that we're in, and it's like, where is Bond's place in this? Is there a reason for him still to exist now the Cold War's done? And I think this film had a really interesting way of looking at that, and kind of positing like new threats that could emerge in the aftermath of the Cold War, and having Bond kind of have to adapt to a new era. For as much as the character doesn't really change, Brosnan Bond doesn't really change that much from his predecessors, but it was still interesting that he was at least confronted by this changing environment. So honestly, I can't really level any criticisms against this film. I think it's just really good, and I think it's so much fun to watch, and I think it's aged really, really well.
I would agree with that. I do think that of all the Bond films, it certainly has its like place in the kind of like top tier of the Bond pantheon, as it were. There are some criticisms I would have against it, going on what you were saying about certain characters. Like personally, I do really like. Again, I wouldn't say she's the best Bond girl. I do agree in that sense, but I actually didn't mind Natalia. I thought it was quite good that she was. This is going to sound weird to be like, oh, she was independent, and I know she has her damsel in distress moments, which you kind of think, oh, great, here we go, Bond coming to save the day. But I mean, she did prove herself capable in other regards, and I thought, okay, we're going in the right direction. Okay, we're not falling back to like Connery era. The less said about that, the better, of course. But another fun fact, of course, is that Judi Dench makes her first debut as M in the franchise, which I have to admit, she was really iconic as she is the first female M, isn't she?
Certainly in the series she was.
Before they got Ralph Fiennes' leathery husk in No Time to Die. Whatever the hell was going on there. But anyway, sorry. Aside. Yeah, I mean, again, going back to what you were saying, she makes like a very interesting point where she challenges Bond and says, you're like does she call him a dinosaur or something like that?
A misogynistic dinosaur, I believe, is the
Yeah.
is the term. A relic of the Cold War.
Exactly. And I do like the fact that, again, as you said, they're kind of challenging how Bond can fit into like the modern era of spies and things like that. The one thing I will challenge is Xena Onatopp. You made an interesting point when I brought this up to you while I was watching the film. The fact that she does look, the actress, I mean, she does look as if she's just having such a good time with this like ridiculous character that goes around killing men with her thighs. But I'm honestly on the fence. I'm like, is this so silly that it's good, or is it just dumb entirely? Is this like the only kind of carryover from the past films, like, you know, Octopussy, Dr. Goodhead, Pussy Galore? Are we regressing back to that era? But not too much. I mean, at least she's kind of capable of dispatching people. But what did you think of that?
Do you know what? I think conceptually your criticisms are fair, and I do think if you just looked at this character on paper, you're like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure about this. I think it all comes down to the acting, and Famke Janssen is the actor who plays this. She's also quite famous for having played Jean Grey in the original X-Men trilogy of films. I think she just does a fantastic job, and it was rewatching it recently that I just came to absolutely adore this character, and she looks like she's just having the most fun. She just throws herself into this role with aplomb, and just everything she does. There's a scene where, obviously the scenes where she's like crushing men with her thighs are probably the most memorable ones, but there's also a scene where she has like a kind of, I want to say like half sexual encounter, half fight with Bond in a sauna, which I think is great. But there's one scene as well in the kind of first half of the film where she arrives with one of the main other baddies, General Uramov. They arrive at the kind of Goldeneye satellite station, and she just begins to like shoot everybody in the place, and she has this just like orgasmic like look on her face as she's doing it, and I just think it's brilliant. I honestly, there's a reason this character is so well remembered, and it's just because it's all because of Famke Janssen. Like, full credit to her. And I just, to me, just watching this, I just think she's such a memorable, such a fun character. Honestly, she might be one of my favorite characters of the whole Bond series. I think it's just incredible. I think it's just the perfect way to take something that conceptually is so stupid and seems like really dumb, and just to make such like a brilliant, from my perspective, such a brilliant character with it. I'm just in awe.
That's the thing, though. Even if you have criticisms about this film, at least they're all memorable. You know, like all the characters are memorable, the set pieces are memorable. We've got Robbie Coltrane, of course, as I think it's only one of 2 appearances as Valentine. What's his second name again?
Zukovsky, I think.
Yeah, that guy.
You know who
yeah,
we're talking
Russian
about.
Robbie. Okay, that's what he's called now.
That should have been his name. Why was that not his name?
MGM, if you want to call us. You know where we are.
If you want to do a George Lucas style re-edit of Goldeneye.
What you mean with the terrible accents? My name is Russian Robbie.
Russian Robbie.
Duh. Oh, and that is as far as I got in the Duolingo course.
Das Vidanya, comrade Satsunami.
Yeah, that's all I know.
That's as far as I got in the course.
Yeah, that's Vidania. That's it. That's really it. I know no other Russian. But speaking of me going on to butcher another language, will we move on to the next film, Tomorrow Never Dies?
I need to get my news.
I'm going to be honest, when I rewatched this film, I actually had a lot more fun with this than I remember, because Tomorrow Never Dies is one of those films that always came on, at least in the UK, it was a channel called ITV2, where they would always rerun old Bond films, and I would catch like snippets of it before someone changed the channel. And I thought it was alright, but as soon as I sat down and watched it from start to finish, I really enjoyed this one. So the plot of this one is a bit more, I was going to say a bit more scaled back, but maybe not quite, where a medium...
Really?
No, until I remembered about the nuclear warhead. Okay.
Do you remember there's a giant freaking like torpedo drill and stealth ship?
I mean, all media moguls have them. Come on.
Of course, yeah, no. What do we think Rupert Murdoch's been doing? Oh, I've not heard what he's been up to this time. Must be building a stealth ship.
Have you not been watching GB News recently?
Is that Piers Morgan's next project?
What, you think it's the French that are like driving away the British fisher boats? No,
Oh.
it's Piers Morgan and he's...
Oh my god, I love it.
For legal reasons, and the panda is waving me down for legal reasons. That's a joke. That is a joke. I am joking. Any people that rhyme with Schmear Schmorgan, it's totally coincidental.
Oh man, we're off his Christmas card list.
Oh, we are.
Or maybe we're on it. We're giving him free publicity here. He'll love that.
That's true. We're not getting hired to GB News anytime soon.
Oh man, my dream job. That's why I was working on this podcast series, so I could slide into a role as analyst on GB News.
What do you think? Thank you. Very cool. Anyway, sorry, GB News bashing aside. Yeah, it's about a media mogul, and I'm talking about Tomorrow Never Dies again. It's about a media mogul who... I still can't get that image of you-know-who writing that submarine. So yeah, it's about a media mogul who decides to try and instigate World War III between the British and the Chinese with, as you said, his stealth submarine. Don't know how that works, because, I mean, technically aren't all submarines stealthy, and Bond has to stop this guy from, causing World War III, and he has to team up with Wei Lin, who is played by Michelle Yeoh, am I right in saying?
Yep, you're correct.
And they have to team up and take down this guy. Honestly, I love it. I think it was a lot of fun. I loved the fact that the character of Wei Lin was just this utter badass throughout the film, that Bond was his same kind of jovial self but took it seriously. But it has one of the worst deaths in it, and I think I texted you at the time. Do you remember?
Do you know what? It's one of these ones that I used to think back and think it was really funny, and then I watched it and I was like, wow, that's actually horrifying.
I think it's probably the most brutal death in the entire Brosnan run.
Oh, definitely in the I think the only one that's more brutal in the whole of the Bond series. Oh, is it Milton Keynes, the guy in the no, Milton Keynes. That's a town. When the town of Milton Keynes had all their heads blown up. But do you know who's the guy? Do you know the guy I mean in License to Kill, who gets put in the air pressurizer and his head gets exploded?
Do you know, I was just thinking that exact scene. I thought that is the only other
Really,
scene.
because that traumatized me as a child when I watched License to Kill when I was far too young. That's the only one that I think is probably more brutal than the death in Tomorrow Never Dies.
Oh yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, basically there's like a huge, it's like a saw/drill thing, and he just grabs him and he just shoves the main villain, who, can I just say, the main villain is like this very sleazy, weedy media mogul type person. He's not a fighter, he's not a brawler, he's just an average Joe going against a commander in the Secret Service, and Bond just grabs him and shoves him into this thing. Because the only other time we've seen like a death like that, as far as I remember, unless there's maybe one in the Connery era, is in License to Kill, when, remember, the drug dealer falls into it but gets obscured by all the mist.
Oh, yeah, old Benicio del Toro was ground up.
But we don't see that, we just see the pink smoke that comes up from like the drugs that are getting put in there, and that was kind of cleverly done, but this is just brutal. The only thing I would say about this film, though, is the villains, other than obviously the media mogul, the villains aren't that memorable. We've got the German guy, we've gonna be. I forgot about the Doctor.
We have ways of making you talk.
Yeah, very good. Yeah, very good.
I'll talk more about I hate that character.
So remember how we were saying that's how far we in Goldeneye, that's how far we got in the Duolingo course for Russian? Yeah, that's how far we got for the German course. 'Cause
The war is over for you.
yeah, exactly. That's exactly what he was like. He was just like such a stereotype. You know, he might as well have kicked down the door and been like, "This is the Bradverse situation for you." Yeah, and you would have been like, "What is it? Who is this clown? Who is this Joker coming in?" Here's a question for you though: do you think that this film was the beginning of the end for the Brosnan run when it came to celebrity cameos? Because we've got Terry Hatcher is one of the secondary love interests in this one.
I see what you mean. I would probably slightly disagree, only for the fact that I think that they at least tried to give Terry Hatcher interesting stuff to do. I don't think it fully works, and I don't think... So Terry Hatcher plays a character called Paris Carver, who is the wife of the main villain of the film, who it turns out had a previous relationship with Bond. And they kind of play on that in the film, and it's an interesting idea. And again, I admire the film for trying to do that. I just don't think it devotes enough time to it. And then basically Harris ends up dying at about the halfway point. She's killed, and they try to make it an emotional moment, but it doesn't quite work because I just don't think enough time's been devoted to it. And also then we have German stereotype doctor in the room being like, "I am a professional," you know, doing all this, it just completely undercutting any kind of emotion they're trying to get in the scene. But I kind of admire that at least they tried to give Terry Hatcher something interesting to do, while later on I think it really did fall into the kind of like, hey, look, here's some celebrities, let's just throw them at the dartboard and hope something works. But I can see what you mean in that you can probably trace, you know, from Tomorrow Never Dies to the later incidents in the Brosnan run.
Is there anything else you would levy against this film?
Going back to the idea of the Brosnan run falling between the Moore and the Dalton eras, where I think that Goldeneye walked the line perfectly, I think that Tomorrow Never Dies strays a bit too far into the kind of Moore goofiness. And I think for as much, and I actually agree with you when you said how much fun you actually had rewatching this film. This is a film that used to make me kind of roll my eyes when I thought about it, because I was like, oh, it's so stupid, it's so silly. And I still think it is, but I actually had fun watching it again. I think it is a good watch, if nothing else. I don't think it's anywhere near the quality of Goldeneye, and I wouldn't rate it as one of my favorite Bond films, but I do think you can have fun watching it. I think it strays a bit too far into the kind of goofiness. One thing that I think is funny about the film is that I think the main villain and the whole kind of premise, his basic role, as you said, is he's trying to stir up a war so he can be like the person to cover it on the scene, and also as well he can get like exclusive broadcasting rights in China. And I think it was very topical at the time, but I think it swiftly became very, very antiquated and ancient. But ironically, it's now kind of gone full circle, and I think it's actually in many ways quite topical again, with sort of like fake news, you know, and issues like that. But yeah, I think it's just a bit too goofy. This film is probably the thing I would level the most against it. I think Michelle Yeoh is great, and I really like her character. I think Pierce Brosnan is good in this, like, overall, and the story is stupid, but I think it's still fun enough that you can enjoy it. So I don't really have too many major apart from the kind of, you know, the stereotypical German doctor and some of the ideas being a bit too half-baked. I don't really have any massive issue with this film, I have to admit.
You really hated that doctor, didn't you?
Tell me I'm wrong. Give me one reason why that character is not objectionable.
Because it's in tomorrow's paper, yeah.
Oh, well, there you go. 10 out of 10.
That was a weird one. Why they gave him a VHS? Do you think he was watching that in loop while he waited for Bond? Or
He's got to do something. I don't know what else do German doctors do.
what I laughed at was, see the other like German thug that works for Carver, and he's like, "Oh, he was my mentor and everything," and he talks about like the chakra torture device or something.
Oh yeah,
like,
he was my PhD supervisor. My dissertation on these chakra torture
it's
thing.
like, what is this film? I do agree with you though. Before we move on to the next one, I do totally agree with you. Goldeneye, although obviously we established about some things like, you know, Boris and Xeno on the top and things, it does balance that line between the comical and the seriousness. For this, as you said, it has come full circle nowadays, and it does definitely feel more realistic in some regards, but the scales are definitely balancing into the goofy stages. And do you know what's ironic? I'm quite curious to hear what you think about this, but do you not think that the longer a James Bond actor's in the role, the more more goofier the films become. So like, look at Daniel Craig, his first couple were very serious and gritty and things, and don't get me wrong, they technically still are, but towards the end with like Spectre and No Time to Die, they just became the stereotypical Bonds that we're used to, with all the gadgets, the one-liners, that kind of thing.
You're completely right. I think Connery suffered the most from this. If you look at Connery's like first three films, Dr. No and From Russia with Love are very, very grounded. Well, for the most part, are very kind of grounded films. Goldfinger goes a little bit more into that kind of goofy territory, but I still think it works. But then, like, past that, those last three films, culminating in Diamonds Are Forever, are just like are just preposterous in every way. And you could argue Moore was the same, although Moore started off pretty kind of preposterous as well. Maybe that's why Dalton is my favourite. Didn't have enough time for his Bond to become like goofy and preposterous.
Well, I mean, it's the same with Lazenby, whose wife's literally shot at the end of the film. Spoilers. He didn't even get a chance.
Imagine Lazenby stayed on. That was a trope at the end of every of his films.
Oh, God.
He got married in another one, got killed in like just increasingly elaborate ways.
And on that note, I'm moving on before I get myself depressed. So, of course, the third film of the run was The World Is Not Enough, which I like this film, but there are certain elements that I'm not a huge fan of. For example, I like the fact that Elan Donan is in it, the castle in Scotland next to Skye, which I actually visited this year. Not because I'm a big Bond fan, but I was just passing the area. And I was like, oh, Elan Donan. And yeah, no, it's a great place. By the way, we're not representatives of Visit Scotland or anything like that, but if you're listening somehow, give us a call. Because it was you that pointed that out, wasn't it?
I think so. I can't remember if you'd gone up there before we'd respectively watched these films. Yeah, I think I pointed out, I was like, oh, do you know the castle? And you were like, oh, I do. I've just been there.
So in The World Is Not Enough, it takes a more serious kind of approach, but not quite. I think it suffers from the same problems as Tomorrow Never Dies. Like, it's trying to tell a serious story of revenge and heartbreak and things like that, but at the same time, you've just got really, really goofy villains and side characters. Whereas we had, like, Michelle Yeoh, as we said, as Wei Lin in Tomorrow Never Dies, and she was like this such a cool, kick-ass Chinese secret agent, and then I think she was supposed to come back for The World Is Not Enough, but they got Denise Richards instead. Now, I could be wrong in that, but I'm sure there's a rumour for that she was meant to come back or have a spin-off.
What an upgrade.
I know.
Michelle Yeoh to Denise Richards.
What we could have had versus what we got. This is the thing again, like, I know I complained about Xena on the Top going into those Pussy Galore tier names, but my god, Christmas Jones, I don't get it. I genuinely don't get the joke. Adam, what's the joke?
The joke is they came up with the line, I thought Christmas only came once every year, and they worked back from that.
That is exactly it. You're not wrong. It's as if they came up with that joke and they're like, okay, how do we write a character around this name? And you're like,
how do we tortuously fit this into this film?
It is awful. No offence to Denise Richards, I'm sure she's a lovely person in real life, but her character was just... Like, I think a lot of people, levy the criticism against the, like, oh, look, she's an attractive woman in a smart person role and things like that. Like, I don't think that's the issue. I just think the issue is the writers had no idea what to do with her character. She's just kind of there. She floats about like a bad smell almost. But sorry, before I go on and dissect it, yeah, the plot of The World Is Not Enough is Bond trying to find the killer of is it like the daughter of a millionaire, billionaire, trillionaire, quadrillionaire, Swiss banker?
Yeah. It's something like that. We don't think we're really ever quite clear what some fat cat imperialist basically is murdered in MI6 headquarters, and Bond is then tasked to like protect his daughter from this international terror group headed by Robert Carlyle's Renard, who's like tangled with this this family previously as they're building this kind of new oil pipeline.
Can I just say, I love Robert Carlyle. I think he's a fantastic actor. He's done some amazing films, but that character is so stupid. So dumb. The whole premise of Renard is the fact that he was shot in the head, but the bullet didn't go all the way through, so it slowly is burrowing into his brain until it kills him, but it means that his nerves are shot, so he can't feel any pain. So it's like he holds like a hot coal, and he's like, I feel nothing. And you're like, well, You feel nothing, but why have you got no marks on your hand? You're not Wolverine. You've not got healing abilities.
But that's the thing, the bullet is apparently making him stronger, right? That's the thing that makes no sense. It's like, okay, fine, I can maybe believe that, right, he's losing, his nerves are like all dying out, but is the fact that he apparently is becoming stronger? I'm like, what pseudoscience is this?
Do you think they were writing this in Neil and Donan and they were like, okay, guys, I think we've written ourselves into a corner here? It's like, what? In the story, they're like, no, literally, we have no idea.
This is what happens when you write a story backwards from one pun.
You know what? I'm wondering if they took this from like DeviantArt or something like a fan fiction, and they were like, okay, how do we write a franchise around this one character? Going back to Christmas Jones, which I hate the name, I genuinely do. You know why I hate it, but what do you think the problem is with her character, Adam? Because honestly, as I said before, I don't think it's the fact that everybody said at the time, oh, Denise Richards is like this attractive woman who is coming into this role pretending she's smart. Like attractive people can obviously be smart too. I think it's more the issue of that she didn't really have a significant role. Like with Natalia in Goldeneye, she was one of the analysts for the Goldeneye project, so she was able to stop Boris from taking over. With Wei Lin, she was able to kick the arse of like Carver and things when she needed to. With Denise Richards' character, like what do you think went wrong there?
I think if we look at Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, and we take there's in both those films there's two main female roles in each, and for Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, both of like the female characters get significant story beats and arcs, and both get like a fair amount of attention put on them. Like Paris Carver obviously has that previous relationship with James Bond, and then Wei Lin built up to be a very kind of badass character, and gets a lot of cool action scenes to do. So they're different, but they both get a fair amount of attention thrown their way. And the same with Goldeneye with Natalia and Xenia. However, when it comes to World Is Not Enough, the writers were clearly fully focused on building up one of the main female roles, that being Electra King, to the detriment of Christmas Jones, who feels like just an afterthought. And I think that is you were completely right when you said, I mean, no offense to Denise Richards, I don't think she's the greatest actor ever, but even if she was, she's working with such like limited and bland writing that I don't know quite what she could have done, to be honest with it. Like the character is just underbaked because the writers were far more focused and far more interested clearly in the character of Electra King, which I think that character has its positives and its negatives as well, but the focus on her just completely like killed any kind of interesting role for Christmas Jones, I think.
Because she comes in at like the last half of the film, doesn't she? Or am I remembering that wrong?
No, like I think it's after halfway through the film. You're right, there's a large chunk of the film where she's not in there at all, which is unique, I think, for like most of the Bond girls, they will appear, both of them will have appeared early on in the film. Perhaps one gets more development later on, but they will have at least shown their faces will be on screen. Like I don't think it's till after halfway that Christmas Jones appears.
Because think about something like, and I know I always go on every time we do a Bond episode about how great Eva Green is in Casino Royale, but think about her character though, where Bond goes out, sorry, that sounds so juvenile. They kiss behind the bike sheds.
Makes a date with Eva Green.
They sneak off in the
Netflix and chill.
Was Netflix even a thing?
That would have been old Netflix, wouldn't it, where you had to order the DVDs?
Netflix, order DVD and get it the next day and then you chill. That would make a boring film. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting sidetracked. Yeah, with that, Bond builds this like really lovely chemistry and relationship with Vesper Lynn, and spoilers again, she ends up betraying him, but for not the reasons he believes initially. And it's like a heartbreaking thing at the end. And again, I don't want all the Bond films to be like doom and gloom and things, because come on, it isn't No Time to Die, but it's just that it's quite sad because he genuinely, he lets his guard down, he really loves this woman, and then he gets really hurt, so he becomes this horrid recluse and everything. But again, going back to something I said earlier, I think it's maybe a reflection of the times that they wanted a more upbeat Bond compared to Timothy Dalton, although he ends up falling for Electra King and having to shoot her. And there's this like really sad, or meant to be sad scene, after he escapes and Russian Robbie gets killed. I think this is the second and last appearance of his character. I'm actually wondering, is this the first time that the Bond films took continuity as seriously, except for Roger Moore in For Your Eyes Only, where he dumps Blofeld into the big chimney because he killed his wife. But is this the first time they kind of kept like a continuity with characters within their own?
I mean, you're forgetting greatest character of all time, Sheriff Bell Pepper?
No,
or whatever it's
J.W.
called.
Pepper.
Live and Let Die.
Not Bell Pepper.
I think that's his name, but the one who appears in both. But I mean, the film series, always had a kind of loose chronology where, they all were technically the same character, and that, like, as you mentioned, the death of Bond's wife is referenced a couple of times. Like, it's referenced in License to Kill as well. And I think apparently it's referenced in this film as well. I think there's, like, allusions to it in World Is Not Enough. So there was always kind of a loose chronology, and obviously, like, Bernard Lee, who played the original M, is in quite a few of the Bond films, and Desmond Llewellyn as Q was in the majority of them. But I think, Sheriff Pepper aside, this was the first time that they had a more strict, as you say, kind of continuity, like within an actor's run of Bond films.
It does seem like that, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always been kind of loose. The continuity's always kind of been a bit like kind of loosey-goosey, but as you say, there was an attempt to build a kind of more stricter one with some parts of this Brosnan run.
It kind of works for the most part, except for Christmas Jones or Electra King and everything. But going back to Electra King, they could have really built something like quite sad and serious with that relationship between Bond and Electra, because they do have, I wouldn't say they have a massive chemistry, but they still have enough to make it passable. But unfortunately, as we know, things don't work out. She ends up getting shot by Bond, and then it's almost as if he just forgets her. Like, did you ever notice that when he shoots her, they have the sad music where he's holding her in his arms, and then he's like, oh, gotta save the world, and then that's it, pays her no mind after that.
You're completely right. It feels very strange because it almost feels like the climax of the film. Like, it feels like this is what the film has been building up to. And imagine if the film had ended with this. If like some of the last things had been Bond killing Electra King, that would have actually made for, I think, a really kind of startling end. Something akin to close to being how the end of Casino Royale is really like, kind of gut wrenching with the death of Vesper Lynd and like Bond's transformation into the person that he's going to become. But the fact is, because Electra King is killed off, and then we still have to go deal with Renard, we have to like save the world in Istanbul and prevent this nuclear submarine going off. It really just robs any chance of a true emotional payoff. And as well, I'm going to level some criticism here at Pierce Brosnan. This is where I don't think he quite, for me personally anyway, I don't think he quite has the acting chops for this. As you said, it just feels kind of like, oh, that's a pity. And then it's like, right, off we go. Like, I think somebody like Timothy Dalton could have done this a lot better. I think could have really given it like I think Daniel Craig could have done it better as well, given it like put real emotion into it. I don't know. I don't know whether he's not up to it or whether like it was the writing or the direction. Maybe his heart wasn't in this film. I don't know, whatever the circumstances are, but it doesn't, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like he can quite carry the weight of that scene. And then with its awkward placement in the film as well, it just robs it really of any kind of emotional resonance.
And speaking of like emotional resonance, there's like two particular characters we haven't addressed in this one. That, of course, being Q, played by Desmond Llewellyn, I hope I'm saying that right, and his introduction to his predecessor, jokingly called R, played by John Cleese. I don't like John Cleese in that role, but I will get more into that for Die Another Day. For this in particular, though, this is Q's last appearance in the series because unfortunately the actor got into a car crash in real life and unfortunately passed away. I know they didn't mean it as his like final scene ever, but it's kind of spooky that was his final scene and quite poignant when he turned around to Bond and he says, got two things to share with you. One, never let them see you bleed. And he said, and what's the second thing? And he turned around and says something like, always have an escape plan. And he presses a button and he like descends into the ground. Now, if you were just watching that without knowing he had died after this film, you think, oh, it's a comical scene, haha, very funny. It's like, that meme of Mr. Incredible that's been going around recently? Have you seen that?
Oh, yeah.
Where it's like people who know and people who don't know. So it's like people who don't know, they've got like the smiley face and like, oh, haha, very funny. And then it's the other side where it's like the serious face. It's like people who know. But what did you think of that scene?
I actually think it's very poignant. I think it's actually very well done. I think it's actually a perfect little send off and a little tribute to the actor who has been with the franchise since the very beginning. And I think he was in every single film up to that point. So I think it was a really nice kind of end, a really nice close for him. And I think it's something the film did really well.
R, on the other hand, didn't like him. I'm going to be honest. I don't think this is one of John Cleese's best roles. I'm going to be honest. He definitely seems to be more of like a bumbling idiot in comparison, which just transfers into Die Another Day. Are we going to do it, Adam? Are we going to pull the trigger and shoot down the gun barrel?
We might as well. I don't know. For me personally, like World Is Not Enough was the one that I struggled the most to rewatch. I'll be honest. Like I found it quite a plodding film, and I found it quite boring. I don't think it's bad. There was nothing that really like hooked me in the way that stuff in Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies had. And even I will say that the film after this. But let's move on. Let's move on, because I think this is the one to really just let our hair down and go crazy with.
As I said before, the further a James Bond actor does go into his like run of films, the more goofy it gets. And honestly, The World Is Not Enough should have been that big red flag flying above saying, we're going to be goofier, we're going to have all the gadgets, the one-liners, we're going to have everything in this. But you know, we were young, we were naive, we just didn't listen. We thought, another Bond film, can't wait. And then we got Die Another Day, which was quite honestly written by someone who has a fetish for dad jokes. That is the only way I can explain this film. It's about James Bond finally going to North Korea to stop a diamond smuggler. He ends up getting captured, tortured for a year. And you might think, wow, Satsu, you summarised the first third of that film. Excellent. What's the other 2/3 about? No. That's the first 10 minutes. They wasted such a good premise on 10 minutes, followed by Madonna's, you know, Adam. Her banging tune.
Sigmund Freud.
Sigmund Freud.
Analyze this.
Is a version of the Human Torch. She caresses James Bond as he's getting tortured. Fantastic Four, she is not. Fantastic Boar, maybe.
Hey, put that on the box.
I would if I could have. You know it. Bond tries to find this Korean diamond smuggler. He comes across Halle Berry, who is a American agent. The Americans are back in this film, only they're just as obnoxious as arguably Sergeant J.W. Pepper. Maybe not as bad, but they're still very like aggressive and, oh no, we have to do what's right and everything. You're like, okay, this is going into borderline parody territory, and it's safe to say, isn't it, that this film was absolutely panned when it came out, wasn't it? Fans didn't like it. The critics said there was too much product placement. Would you agree with that?
Oh god, yes. This film was panned, and you'd probably say rightly so by everybody. I think a lot of people consider this to be the worst of the Bond films, and this was the one that I think is what people talk about nearly being a franchise killer. It was considered to be that bad.
So Adam, why was it a franchise killer?
I mean,
share with the class. Come on.
Because if you look at this film, it really is terrible. In everything it does, I think it basically fails. The story, as you said, is ridiculous. And it's stupid ridiculous. It's not like kind of good. You're like, oh wow, this is kind of good, clever, ridiculous. No, it's really dumb. Really, really dumb. The characters are pretty uniformly bad. The acting isn't great, but then again, the writing is worse. So don't think I can really fully hold that against the actors. There's actually a fine cast in here. You know, Halle Berry is an Academy Award winner. We have Rosamund Pike, who's a fine actor. I like Michael Madsen as well. Judi Dench in this film, but they're just given such crappy material to work with that it's just, it's an utter disaster. The CGI in this film. Are there many big budget films that have worse CGI? I'm trying to think.
The Scooby-Doo film, if you count that.
Oh, okay, that's fair. Okay, well, you know what? It's on a par, I think, with the Scooby-Doo. The action scenes are awful for the most part. I mean, I think there's a chase, like a hovercraft chase in the beginning, which I think is quite good. And there's a kind of ridiculous, like, sword fighting scene. I think it is stupid, but because a lot of it is practical, I think it still has some excitement to it. But there's a terrible CGI ice surfing scene where James Bond is surfing away from a tsunami tsunami. There's a terrible bit where an ice palace is getting like melted and it looks awful. The editing in this film is shocking. There's like needless slow-mo, needless speed up, bad cutting. Like it's really bad on like every level, this film, and I think that's why it was considered considered a franchise killer and people rate it so lowly. I've got to be honest though, this film is a lot of fun to watch. I had an absolute blast watching this film. It's funny to laugh with, but it's even funnier to laugh at. I almost recommend watching this film if you haven't, because it's so funny. Like, how do you feel about it? Am I crazy for just enjoying this film? For the stupid ride that it is.
Do you know what I love? See the fact that everyone I've asked about this film who actually enjoys it always says the same thing. They enjoy it because it's just that bad. I've never once met a fan of this film who said, oh, I love this film because of the deep plot and the action. It's like, no. They all love it because it's an absolute train wreck. And this came out in, is it right to say the 50th anniversary of James Bond?
It was the 40th.
Oh, 40th, sorry. Yeah, this came out in the 40th anniversary of James Bond, and yeah, they certainly pay homage. I mean, they've got the crocodile from Octopussy, they've got the famous scene from, is it Dr. No, where Halle Berry comes out of like the sun.
Goldfinger.
Oh, Goldfinger.
Oh, no, sorry, Doctor. I'm thinking of the laser scene. Sorry, no, you're right, Doctor. No,
oh,
sorry.
yeah, there is the laser scene as well. Yeah, we'll get to that, don't you?
Literally, a character says diamonds are forever.
Does do they actually?
Yeah, the main bad guy goes at one point, oh, well, you know what they say, diamonds are forever. I really wanted them to keep saying, I really wanted some character to be like, well, you know what they say, Octopussy. Oh, I'm just after my doctor appointment now. Who's your doctor with? Oh, it's Dr. No.
It's like, do you like my false eye? Yes, I do. Thank you. It's a golden eye. But I mean, they did that in The World Is Not Enough, where, to be fair, technically they do say, like, oh, it's the Bond, like, family motto or something like that. At least that made more sense than someone saying diamonds are forever. In their universe, how does that make sense?
I don't know. If this was, like, a proper continuity, I really wanted, like, Pierce Brosnan to have a flashback to when he was Sean Connery and he was driving a moon buggy around and doing whatever, all the stupid crap that's in the Diamonds Are Forever film. That would have been awesome.
Do you know what bit I was like really confused at? See the bit where Jinx, played by Halle Berry, goes into the room and she meets up with Bond and she turns around and goes, ah, you scared the living daylights out of me. What does she mean by that?
You know, it's so meta. You have to be there to get it.
You know, people listening to this must be thinking, are they joking now? Or is this actually in the film?
I could actually believe that line was in there. To be honest, having just watched it like yesterday on the day of recording, I could believe that line was in the film.
I mean, technically she said, ah, the living daylights. I mean, there was a bit of a pitch there.
And then Bond went back, da-da-da, just live and let die.
You know, I felt it was a bit weird when they killed the wrong Bond and they just had Simon Le Bon floating in the ice palace. I thought that was a bit dark, but honest to God, I think we're writing our own like better film, a better version.
We really are. We need to do an episode where we make a better version of Die Another Day, but still have to pay homage to all the previous Bond films.
Step 1, take out the goddamn ice palace. Why do we have to go to an ice palace?
You know, you say that jokingly, but that would fix probably about like at least 30% of what's wrong with this film, probably more.
Who built an ice palace? How would that sustain itself? You know what? I don't want to get into the architecture of Iceland here, wherever it was filmed, because it just seems like there are ridiculous moments of Bond. We all know from the Roger Moore era, from, for example, the beginning of Thunderball, where a man dresses up as his own widow and tries to be a Bond. And then Bond escapes in a jetpack and fires like goo at them from his car. One of the best like openings, by the way. I don't see how you can top that. But that's the thing though, you get stupid moments like that, but this is just littered with them. You know, there's no like moment where they take themselves seriously, even though they try to take themselves seriously. And I don't know how true this is. think it was confirmed in an interview, but I could be wrong. But I heard that Pierce Brosnan actually wanted to do a more serious Bond if he got like another film, or like especially after he escapes from North Korea and he wants to be this very tragic and serious figure. There's a lot of parallels between that and Skyfall though, in the sense that both agents, like both Brosnan and Craig, do not give a shit once they're back in the job. They're just like, oh, okay, you abandoned us. Okay, right, bye. I'm away to shoot the bad guy. Bye. It's like, really? Are we not going to come back to this? Or no, you're just going to go to Cuba to, was it the Isla de los Organos or something like that?
The Island of Organs, as I translate it, probably terribly.
Although I did appreciate the CGI Halle Berry that dives off like a goddamn cliff. And I'm like, that doesn't seem responsible.
I appreciate the creepy doctor who's like, oh, I enjoy working on you, and then she just shoots him in the face.
Can I step in and just say how much I hate the jokes in this film?
I wish I could argue with that. I was like, quickly, Adam, think of a classic line from Die Another Day. I'm like, oh, I can't even think of one.
What, you mean like the moment where they go up to the balcony and he goes, wow, this truly is a view to kill for.
I did like the line in the fencing where he's like, oh, I know how to keep my tip up.
Right, okay, I'm going to go for the throat here. So anyone who's like very sensitive to like this humour in the film, please cover your ears. But this is the worst pun Bond I think I've ever seen in my life. Rewatching it just made it all the worse. I don't even know where to begin. Bond always has a quip, okay? And as I said in License to Kill, when he finds the guy who gets impaled by the forklift, and he would say something like, oh, he didn't get the point, or something. He got the point, that was it. Oh, he got the point. And I always felt as if that line was a bit out of place. It's like they just put it in there because, it's James Bond, he has to have like a quippy line and everything. But imagine that one condensed moment stretched into an entire film. And that's exactly what this film is. It's just all these terrible, terrible puns. And usually I love that kind of humour. I love the dad jokes and things. But as I said before, whoever wrote this had some kind of fetish for them. Because, it's things like when he grabs the bell, when he gets saved, he's like, oh, saved by the bell. There's nobody around except the audience. He literally might as well just look into the camera, wink, and then chug down a Pepsi before he gets arrested by the North Koreans. Who was that line for? There's also the one, as you said, where he has like a flirting match with Madonna. I genuinely think that was written into Madonna's contract. Like, she refused to do the theme song unless they had like a flirting scene, which is like, okay, Brosnan, you have to flirt with Madonna. He's like, really?
Can I just say, I love your logic that they heard the producers heard the Madonna track and they're like, my God, we just have to have this in our film. They agree to all her demands. This is gold, this track.
This is going to get us in with the hip kids.
Do you know what the hip kids love? References to Sigmund Freud.
Analyse this. What was the other line? Oh yeah, analyse this. Truly the voice of our generation. She doesn't even fence! Can I just say? She's meant to be a fencing instructor and she just like stands on the sidelines after flirting with Bond in like an uncomfortable 5 minutes. I know it's only 2 minutes, but it feels like 5 minutes, okay?
It feels a lot longer.
Is it just me or does she have a different outfit compared to the other people? Or am I misremembering that?
It does look like she raided Xenia on a Topps wardrobe, I'll be honest.
She has like the leather suit. Am I remembering that correctly? Or has my brain just been warped by this film?
No. She's got like a leather corset on.
Yeah, and she's like, oh, look at me, I'm fencing. And it's like, that's not standard gear. Hey, you're not a fencer. Do you think like the local fencing clubs have that issue quite often?
I mean, I imagine they must be swamped with it.
Yeah, like they have to like chase Madonna out with a broom.
Like, get out of here, you own them.
Come on, get.
I imagine that like every 2 days or so, some people get like into a heated fencing match and just pull out the broadswords and start slashing at each other up and down.
I mean, to be fair, that is a great fight scene.
It's great. And can I say how much I love that literally I think in like virtually every other Bond film, Bond will meet the villain and they'll verbally spar. Yeah, it'll be like psychological war games for a while, and then it's not until like the very end that they engage in like fisticuffs or whatever. I swear about 2 minutes into Bond's first meeting with Gustav Graves, they're literally like trying to hack each other's limbs off with like katanas and broadswords and claymores and everything.
Can I just say though, this is probably my favourite K-drama movie of all time.
I mean, I can see why. Squid what now?
I mean, you've got family drama, you've got the slow motion. Yeah, I honestly, yeah, move aside K-dramas. Crash Landing on You, move aside. For all the like small percentage of people who actually watch K-dramas out there going, I got that reference, I appreciate you. But it does seem more like a K-drama, doesn't it? And I know this kind of predates before. I mean, don't get me wrong, I don't know the landscape of K-dramas in the West in 2002, but it almost seems as if it borrows a lot of elements from that. I mean, Bond literally stops his heart at one point.
Oh yeah, he stops his heart at one point to get out of like prison, right, and to flirt with a nurse.
And then the Chinese government decides to give him a passport to go away to Cuba. This film is all over the place, isn't it?
Thanks, China. You're all right.
Thanks, China. Very cool. It's like, what is going on in this film? And yeah, they end up going to Cuba. Do you know what it feels like, though? It doesn't feel like they're going there for the sake of the plot. They're just going there because, oh, we've got these grand locations. Let's, just use these grand locations. When he goes to Iceland and he meets Mr. Kill and literally says, that's a name to die for. Why, Adam? This isn't a rhetorical question, Adam. I'm asking you why. Why?
Do you know, I wish I could answer. I mean, the Bond films have always had, you would say that they don't usually have natural dialogue, in that I'm pretty sure people don't usually, like, talk this way, but particularly Die Another Day. Like, I don't think, I mean, if there is anybody who talks exclusively in puns, and like dad jokes, please never come near me, because I don't. That sounds like a nightmare. Just to be like, oh, what are you doing today? And it's like, oh, insert pun here for the rest. I'm like, oh my god.
As I said, though, I love dad jokes. I love puns. I love that kind of humour, but it feels like that kind of obnoxious friend / stranger who won't leave you alone at a party. You know that way where it's just like, oh, what you doing today? Well, let me tell you about my life. And you're like, please leave me, please. Just want to come here and enjoy the party. It's like, haha, enjoy the party. Oh, it's party time. Haha. Oh, I'm gonna die another day. It's like, are you okay, sir? No. It's like, oh.
There's a lot of things I enjoy. Like, I really enjoy having pasta with chili pesto. I don't want to eat pasta with chili pesto for 2 hours and 12 minutes. Like, you may like dad jokes, but you don't want to just exclusively hear that for 2 hours and 12 minutes, I'm pretty sure.
Is that how long this film is?
That is how long the film
No
is.
way.
It's a long one. Well, I think that's probably on the longer side.
True. Slap that in the box as well. Die Another Day. Jesus Christ, is how long? Between the race switching and, as you said, the awful editing. Again, we've got another love betrayal, which is something I actually didn't notice until just there, but like, we already had like a love interest who betrays Bond and the world is not enough. Why did they do it 2 in a row?
When something's that good, you need to instantly do it again.
I mean, technically they did it 3 times in a row with Casino Royale, but like, Jesus
Oh, that's true. They finally perfected it. Like, right, third time lucky, here we go.
What is wrong with this franchise?
Also, can we just discuss how Rosamund, and again, spoilers here, but Rosamund Pike's character betrays the British government because she wanted to win a fencing tournament? No, so I suppose it was the Olympics, but I did just love that. He's like, right, I'll let you win the gold medal by default. It's like, yes, I will betray my country now and become loyal servant of North Korea.
It's like, yes, stand aside 006 from Goldeneye, because his family were betrayed and executed by the Soviet Union. Oh, no. That is a poor excuse. Tomorrow never dies. He only wants the rights to broadcast in China and he'll kill anyone. No, that's terrible motivation. And then, yeah, fencing tournament, thumbs up. And then we get Jinx, who, of course, is... I don't like her. I'm going to be honest. And no offence to Halle Berry, but I just find her character just there. Again, I think it's more of a writing issue, probably.
I agree. Again, I don't think it's Halle Berry's fault. I think you're completely right. I think it's just a poorly written character who's given virtually nothing to do other than, like, stab Rosamund Pike with the art of war.
Oh, yeah.
And put a diamond in her belly button.
I actually wrote a note from the intro that just says blood diamonds. Can I just say I was actually physically disgusted by that scene? I don't mean the act of putting a diamond in your belly button. I don't care about that. I mean the fact that they make a big thing about these being conflict diamonds, taken away and people dying over them. And Halle Berry is rolling around in them, being like, oh, do we have to give them back? I'm like, you sick, you know what?
You're completely right. It's the most disgustingly, like, materialistic thing I can think of.
Do you know what it would be like? See if, like, in Casino Royale, if he took like all the chips and then he slept with Vesper on top of them, and that's how the film ended. It's like, come on, James, come back to bed and cash in. It just cuts to clips of like the wars in Africa with child soldiers and things, and it's like, because that's the thing you want to remember James Bond for: sleeping in a bed of fucking blood diamonds. Thank you, MGM. Thank you. Very cool. That honestly turned my stomach. I was kind of like, really? More so than Christmas Jones. I'm going to be honest, more so than that. Honestly, what were your thoughts? See, rewatching this film and that slaps you in the face.
Do you know what? It was funny. It was funny watching this film and seeing how much I've changed in 20 years. Because I do remember watching it as a 10-year-old and being like, "Oh, this is awesome," and everything, and obviously not getting not getting the conflict time and implication, and everything. And then watching it now and being like, "Oh, this is slightly uncomfortable." I'm not sure I like this. So yeah, like I think is maybe the only thing. I suppose we could argue as well the fact that the film revolves around a Korean man changing himself to become white. I don't know. That's I think we're in slightly dodgy territory there as well. I think those are maybe the only two truly offensive bits in the film. Like I think the rest of it's offensive, but mostly because it's just so bad. But it's kind of funny.
Out of curiosity, when did Mission Impossible 2 come out?
Oh, I think it was the late 90s, so I think that came out just before this.
Because I know there's like a kind of subplot in that where technically it's kind of stupid, it's more masks, but there was that whole, oh, people aren't who they say they are, and what was the other one? Oh yeah, Face Off.
Of course.
With Nicolas Cage and John Travolta, that classic.
The one that did it well.
Oh yeah, they did it better than a man who, as you said, decided to turn from the spawn of a devilish North Korean general to a British billionaire, playboy, yeah. Clearly the same thing. Clearly two sides of the same conflict diamond here.
Can I also say, I love how this film makes the father, the North Korean general, who's the father of the main villain, out to be heroic.
In what ways?
Well, no, but see, he's the one who tries to stop. He's always like, "Oh, I disapprove of all this stuff," and then like he tries to stop his son from destroying the minefields so that North Korea can invade South Korea and everything, and like stop him from using Icarus. Again, it's like that thing like I talked about at the beginning, where it's like they almost don't want to make a moral judgment on countries and regimes. It's like, these North Koreans, they're all right. It's the rogue element, isn't it? I just really like. I feel like if there's one country you could be like, let's just make a blanket statement, people would probably be like, okay, North Koreans are all bad. That kind of jives with our popular perception of that regime. But I do find it funny that there's this heroic North Korean character and maybe we should celebrate that. Maybe that's something to be celebrated in its own way, in its own bizarre way.
Speaking of glaring plot holes, and believe me, there's many a plot hole in this one, can I just talk about Project Icarus for a moment?
Please do.
Other than the fact it's utterly stupid. So Project Icarus, unlike Goldeneye, which is just like a satellite system that'll blast like things to hell and back, which made sense, whereas this is like a giant tinfoil disc in the sky.
With diamonds.
With diamonds. It's a diamond.
I'm sure it's made of diamonds, right? Is that not why he's getting all these diamonds?
For God's sake.
Have I got that completely wrong?
I wouldn't be surprised. Can you imagine if it's like, oh yeah, Project Icarus, but we're going to call it Goldfinger?
Well, you know what they say, diamonds are forever.
Yes.
And the man with a golden gun.
Yes. And the spy who loved me. They could have called it Moonraker. They could have called the satellite Moonraker.
That would have been perfect.
Yeah.
That is a missed opportunity.
But anyway, so going back to Project Icarus, basically he turns around and he says how this super weapon, and I get that this is an excuse for him saying like, oh, it's going to end world hunger when, it's meant to be a super weapon. This particular plot point got me so curious and confused that I decided to look up the countries on the internet, but I looked up the countries with the most world hunger, and then also looked up what the weather was like there. Long story short, I don't think adding more sun to said countries would actually help. If anything, I think it would exacerbate the issue. What fool at the UN turned round and said, oh yeah, do you know what these countries which are starving from droughts and famine need? More sun, because that's what we need. This is obviously something I never noticed when I was younger, but am I going crazy?
That is like the most salient point that's been made. I mean, you've made very many like well-reasoned and well-argued points tonight. That is the most like infallible bulletproof point. A second son. Oh my god. This is how these bureaucracies work. Everything just gets caught in committees and everything. They're like, oh yeah, just approve it. A second son. That'll solve everything.
What are they growing? If there's no water, what are they growing under the sun?
Yeah, here we go. This is how he's gonna solve world hunger, right?
Okay, I'm ready.
People won't be concerned about being hungry if there's no water for them to drink.
I mean, they wouldn't even be there. It like evaporates everything.
If they're getting burnt alive by the power of two suns, they won't be concerned about world hunger.
Do you think there's another setting on it though? Like other than
What, like a dimmer switch?
yeah, like
What, like more powerful?
is there like a setting that says end world hunger and then on the other side it just says death rate?
Yeah, there's end world hunger, there's blow up minefields, and then there's, as you say, there's destroy the planet, I presume.
Of all the things, because obviously Goldeneye is a super weapon, and they said they decommissioned it and everything. Oh, spoilers, they hadn't, and this rogue element comes in and tries to scoop it up. In terms of the story, that's believable. Tomorrow Never Dies, the manipulation of information and playing both sides against one another, that's believable. The world is not enough. It's just stereotypical, oh, they stole a submarine and they're going to blow up. Oh, I can't remember what they were going to blow up.
Istanbul.
Really? Was that it? I mean, no offense to Istanbul, but like, really? Why were they blowing up Istanbul?
He wanted everybody to be a part of his nuclear family.
Oh, yeah, because of the pipeline. Yeah. I nearly forgot that. That's how well I remember that film. I was like, wait, why does he want to... yeah, even then, that's semi-believable. But to change your race, harness the power of the sun, and then become a British billionaire and take fencing lessons from Madonna? I'm sorry, this is the most fan-fiction-y out of the four of them. And I know I use that as an insult quite a lot, but this is by far the most fan-fiction-y one out of all of them. Or am I just going crazy and I'm wrong to say that?
No, you're completely right in everything that you've said. But still, please go watch this film. It's amazing for every single misstep that we've catalogued, and there's so many more that we've not even touched. There'll be stuff that I've forgotten. This film puts every foot wrong, and it's amazing for it.
And on that note, and on Her Majesty's Secret Service, of course, how would you rate the Brosnan run overall? Just as we finish up, how would you rate it overall?
I think it has one really standout film, and I think Goldeneye is an exceptional Bond. It's a great film all round. I think it's an exceptional Bond film. I think it's one of the best. Tomorrow Never Dies, I think, is good. It's not one of my favorites. I think it's good. I don't really like The World Is Not Enough. I find it quite boring. And Die Another Day is terrible, but amazing. It's in its own separate category by itself. But like, looking at it overall, I'm not really a fan, I have to admit, of Pierce Brosnan's run. I think, again, this is my personal opinion here. For me, it's a shame for Pierce Brosnan that he falls between my two favorite Bond actors, Timothy Dalton and Daniel Craig. So I don't know. It's just, when I look at his run of films, his body of work doesn't resonate with me. And I think as well, for me, my favorite of the Bond actors are the ones who like did kind of really memorable things with the role. So for instance, like Timothy Dalton brought this just this absolute world weary, burnt out, spent man who hates what he does, but that's all he knows how to do. While Daniel Craig kind of brought this kind of blend of like toughness, but also like emotional frailty, which I really, really like. And even kind of looking back at, somebody like Sean Connery, I thought he brought this kind of raw masculinity for both good and for bad to the role, which I think made him stand out. For me, Pierce Brosnan just doesn't do anything that really stands out to me. He looks and acts suave, he's a handsome gentleman, he can be funny, he can do some emotions, but there's nothing there that when I look at it that I'm like, that's the one standout thing, that's the thing that I'm like, that's what Pierce Brosnan does that none of the other actors do. And that's just for me, like, I just rate him lowly because of that. I don't think he's bad in the role. He's just really kind of unmemorable for me. I just don't think he did anything special with it like some of the other actors did. So I like some of the films, and I think most of them are worth watching for different reasons, but I can't really rate it as one of my favorite runs, I have to admit.
I personally think that in terms of like the image of Bond, Pierce Brosnan's probably like up there next to like Sean Connery and the likes. I don't know what it is. I think maybe it is because of his looks that they chose him. You know, he's just so iconic with the way he carries himself, with the way he delivers one-liners and puns, with the way he does his action and things. I think he does a great job in the role, at least at the beginning, but I feel as if maybe, I don't know, because as we said, Bond is quite a reactionary series, and in this particular period, we've got the end of the Cold War, and we've got the beginning of this kind of new age of espionage and different geopolitics. So you think, well, who's going to be the next enemy? So we had like the fallout of the Soviet Union in Goldeneye. We had a news mogul who, let's face it, that's always going to be timeless, that kind of story. The world is not enough. We had just your standard terrorist slash crazy millionaire, and then You Die Another Day is just when they lost the plot. And I get they were trying to get like the anniversary stuff in and everything, as I said, Living Daylights and so forth. Yeah, it seemed like a weird choice in the way that, you know, they did everything. I can't remember if this is true, but I think it might be something to do with the director of Die Another Day as well, but there's a lot of factors that lead to this film not being received as well. There's like the impossible gadgets. There's actually someone on YouTube, and I can't remember the name for the life of me, but they did like a James Bond retrospective, and I remember them saying like how the Aston Martin Vanish actually works, or should work rather, practically, and it's like it takes small cameras and it replicates its surroundings to make it seem invisible. And this reviewer was like, well, if Bond was hiding behind it, then his face would be all smeared because it's like pressed up against the camera, and he actually shows you like a photoshopped image of it, and I've still got it saved on my computer to this day. It is the funniest thing I think I've ever seen. Pierce Brosnan's face like warped and stretched across the car. You're like, oh god. You know, you've got the laser scene in that as well. There's just so much in that film that you could criticise, but you know, it's like a weird spectrum of films. You know, you've got your serious ones, you've got your absolutely you know what, insane ones. It just seems like it's all over the place, and I don't know if... Here's a question, just as we're wrapping up, but do you feel as if there's less of a consistent theme with Brosnan's run, as opposed to like Daniel Craig, Timothy Dalton, Connery and Moore?
Yeah, I definitely think there's less of a consistent theme than somebody like Dalton or Craig. Well, obviously, the Craig kind of arc feels quite narratively consistent for the most part. You know, they really did try to build consistency there, and his character's growth as well. And sort of the same with Dalton as well. Like, License to Kill isn't exactly like a direct follow-up to Living Daylights, but that character does feel very consistent. I feel it's more in line, Brosnan's more in line with kind of the way the Connery and the Moore films developed, in that if you look at like Connery's character in Diamonds Are Forever compared to Dr. No, they seem like completely, you can almost believe it's completely different actors doing it. There doesn't seem to be a kind of logical through line there. You know, again, it's been a while since I've seen the Moore films, but it does feel as well like the Moore films were more all over the place and didn't really feel all that connected. So I guess the way Brosnan kind of fits in with those more than, you know, as you say, it's more than the more consistent characters of like Dalton and Craig.
It's honestly just a shame because, as I said, I think Brosnan wanted to go out with more of a like serious film. You know, I think he probably would have loved it if his was more in line with Craig's run or Dalton's run, but he's kind of in this awkward middle phase where the world wasn't quite ready for serious Bond, but he maybe went to the other side of the spectrum where it was just too goofy, and I think that's what's kind of alienated people at the end of the day. I would still recommend though that people check out this run, just to mirror what you were saying. Yeah, Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, I would say, are definitely the ones to check out if you want like more of the good films. But if you want to see the train wrecks that we were talking about, The World Is Not Enough and Die Another Day, go check them out, because you might not enjoy them, but you'll have a lot of fun with them. And at the end of the day, if you're not having fun, you're crying about it on the internet. So yes, go watch it. On that note, I think that's probably like a good place to stop. Do you?
Go watch Die Another Day. Last like invocation. Just go watch it. You might regret it, but you won't. It's so stupid, but it's so much fun.
As we finish this episode, I'll leave you with the words of my partner when I finished this film with her. She said, and I quote, seriously? So Ringing endorsement. You didn't show your partner this, did you, Adam?
We watched the first three, but she didn't quite fancy Die Another Day, but I think we're going to watch it. I think I'm going to force her to watch it.
When are you getting the Blu-ray?
As soon as I'm finished with this episode, I'm going straight to my local online retailer to order it.
And on that note, I won't keep you back any further, Adam.
Come on, I'm itching.
So, as always, Adam, thank you so much for joining me in another Bond episode.
My pleasure. I'm always happy to talk about the highs and the lows of this series.
If you lovely listeners at home would like to hear more of our James Bond content, or maybe just our other episodes, you can catch us on Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, and of course YouTube under the name Satsunami. Just look for the red panda and we will see you there. But until then, thank you all once again for listening. Stay safe, stay awesome, stay hydrated, and most importantly, analyse this.